Hello, everybody, and welcome to this panel discussion on rewiring rural connectivity to Scotland's tech ecosystem. To introduce myself, I'm Angus Rogers. I'm the Ecosystem Manager at Community Lab. We're a Scottish startup looking to empower communities from the bottom up using technology. Today I'm joined by Ranald Rickson on my left, Ross Tuffy, and Maria Bell, who is dialing in from Shetland. I'll rather than me do a dodgy job of introducing them, I'll let them do the talking.
Hi, Ronald Rickson here. As you may be able to tell from or detect from the accent, from the west coast of Scotland, from brought up predominantly in Kintyre, albeit my dad was based further kind of north, so I got connections up kind of Malagway as well. Started my career in finance, working as an analyst in banking. And then moved into property. I actually studied here at Strathclyde in Glasgow, Strathclyde University, finance and economics here. So I've kind of gravitated, and now I was involved in various digital projects over the years, and kind of combining my interests in innovation, digital innovation, and now offering consulting services in terms of open data, prop tech, travel tech. And this is one of the areas I'm really passionate about, which is helping to develop the tech ecosystem in remote and underserved communities.
Cool. Ross Tuffy, and as you can detect from my accent, I'm a plastic Scotsman. I've been living here for 25 years, so not born and bred, but raised my family here. Background, 20-odd years in large corporates, Ernst & Young and Diageo. And then founded my own software company in 2009. Grew that through the mobile kind of space, if you like, mobile apps, etc. That great early sort of 2010s when that expanded. Sold that in 2017, and since then I've been consulting and investing and supporting the tech ecosystem, particularly in the area of skills development. I chair Skills Development Scotland's Digital Economy Skills Board. And more recently, I'm picking up a role within the Office of the Chief Entrepreneur, looking at how do we support the development of entrepreneurial campuses across Scotland.
Excellent. And Maria, if you can hear us.
I can hear you fine, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Bell. I'm the Managing Director at Mesomorphic. We're a software development company based in Shetland, and we founded the company back in 2015. We work with SME business leaders and digital entrepreneurs across Scotland, and we are also committed to supporting next generation of developers. And in order to do that, we co-founded Silicon Croft to support digital education across the Highlands and Islands.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. Okay, and so before we start, I should outline how we're hoping this panel discussion will work. We're trying to take a bit of an experimental approach with the reason being is these conversations around tech ecosystem can often indulge in the problem space and not really enter the solution space. So we're borrowing a concept from product management with the theory that technology-related problems need people to think like technologists. So we're going to use the double diamond process where we start small, we discover the problem, we then narrow in and we define what the problem looks like. We then go outwards again as we develop a proposed solution, and then we go narrow again and we look at what delivering that problem might look like. So hopefully at the end of this conversation we'll have some kind of intervention that might add to the hopefully. Okay, so here it goes. So I'm actually going to be a bit regimented with this, so I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes to talk about the discover phase, and then 5 minutes for the three phases that follow. So here we go. So discovering the problem. First thing is the term tech ecosystem is thrown around a lot these days. What does it mean to you? Shall
I kick off on that one? So if you look at, there's lots of different various definitions out there, but if you look at how STIR, the Scottish Tech Ecosystem Review, categorised it into education, infrastructure and funding. So it's all the elements that actually make up the ability for tech to grow across that. So it's not just the wires, it's not just the funds or whatever, it's across the whole area of that.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, it's something that's very dynamic, or it needs to be dynamic. The tech ecosystem, as we speak about in Scotland, the context for that is we're part of a larger ecosystem, and a lot of things happening externally, and that we need to adapt to. And it's I think that there are going to be changes taking place over the coming years in terms of kind of taxation, regulation, all these sorts of things that we're not fully in control of, and competition. So. We need to adapt to that as well. So it's something that's live.
Excellent. And Maria?
I think I'm going to echo what's just been said there. The tech ecosystem to me is starting the inspiration at a younger age. It's cultivating the skills, and it's also an ending result of creating products and creating businesses that support these products. There's lots of bits inside a tech ecosystem, and for me, a good tech ecosystem joins all the dots together.
Excellent. And when we think of rural connectivity to the tech ecosystem, what barriers are in place at the moment? And these barriers could be systematic, or systemic, or practical.
I think if maybe I can touch on just one of the practical ones that can sometimes get overlooked when we're talking about the tech ecosystem and trying to develop unicorns and trying to, build it up kind of higher level. Digital infrastructure in Scotland is still quite behind. I've done a reasonable amount of travelling, and a few years ago I can remember coming across a report, and I noticed that connectivity was a lot better in other parts of the world in comparison to Scotland. And I came across a report in 2016, sometimes in places you wouldn't expect, and it ranked, UK was ranked 54th in the world in terms of 4G coverage. This was an Open Signal report. Now, Scotland wasn't categorised as a separate country in that report, but, I guess we'd maybe be somewhere in the region of 80th or 100th in the world in terms of 4G coverage. I can't underestimate, I can't understate rather enough how important it is to improve our digital infrastructure. We've still got situations where I'm from, Kintyre even, where, less than 50 miles from Glasgow, you've got lack of mobile connectivity with multiple operators. And, that's something that's really important. It affects people's travel experiences, booking, payments, all these basic things that we've not yet got in place. And we've had R100 rollouts that have been, years overdue. So there's a lot to be done in that space.
I think you've got to look really, really broadly at barriers. If you look at how organisations, businesses, or not-for-profits develop their technologies and or we develop tech products, then you've got a fairly systematic approach to it. You've got the inspire phase where we're trying to encourage people to understand what might be the possibilities they might engage with. So what are the barriers to to inspiring people? And these are the same barriers that are there for urban-based as they are in rural areas. And then you've got the kind of, how do we discover what the opportunity might be? So you've kind of got an idea. How do you take that idea and really drill it and understand from a product development point of view what the opportunity is? There's then the whole area of education, the fundamentals, learning the fundamentals of what you need to know in order to grow a piece of technology or grow a product or grow an offering. The whole area of technology is and sort of entrepreneurship around building a company is all about it's all about the practical application. So it's having those opportunities to apply the technologies and really practically trying them, failing with them, retrying them, and succeeding. And then ultimately it's to scale it. It's to scale the backside off of it as quick as we can. So within those areas there are many barriers, and some of those are behavioural. Some of those are, I don't believe I can do this, and that's a big one to get over it. Some of those are infrastructural, as we said, around this, and some of them are educational. So how do we provide access to that fundamental learning anywhere at any time?
And Maria, I'm not sure if you could hear Ross just then, but if there's anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I can hear bits. I keep getting a drop out in the audio. So forgive me if I do repeat something that's already been said. From a personal experience, some of the barriers that I've encountered is the geographical location can sometimes be quite a hindrance, but also time. Time is always a barrier for no matter what we try to do. So in Shetland, we've got 22 primary schools. In order for me to go around the schools in a 6-week block, that takes six business days. So it's working out what's a scalable way to do that. So that's always a bit of a barrier, but also it takes time for me to travel down onto the mainland, and it'll be the same obviously coming back up the way. So thinking about how we can reach some of the areas in a sustainable way is a barrier we need to get across as well.
Very much so. And even in the case of today, at this event, weirdly, the bottleneck for digital connectivity is actually here in this fairly modern conference centre in Glasgow. And Maria's in Shetland with perfect Wi-Fi. I'm currently here with my phone. I'm on a signal phone call with Maria so she can hear what I'm saying, and then we're hearing her through the system. And I think Ross mentioned earlier.
It's crazy. I mean, if you look at, 2 years ago, in the autumn of 2020, the phrase went around 5 years technology development in 5 months. Right, this was the pandemic drove huge evolution and revolution in how we communicate and how we connect each other. This conference, if it was on last year, would have been it would have been remote probably, as in you dial into it, or it would have been hybrid. Why is it not hybrid today? We cannot afford to lose the learnings that we got from the last 2 years. It's really, really important that we maintain the connectivity that we have, so that we can, spread the learnings and people can engage from anywhere, wherever they are. Technically, globally. It doesn't have to be just rural communities; it could be globally.
And I was just going to say, I think as well that centralisation is. We've talked about the kind of need to level up at times, and obviously it's relevant in the UK context. It's very relevant in a Scottish context as well. The need to level up. We're quite centralised in Scotland in our approach to things, and I think even when we're looking, there's been huge opportunities in terms of remote working. It's been accelerated massively over the last couple of years, and we really need to grasp that. And when it comes to kind of things like workplace footprints, digital skills that maybe exist within public sector organisations, publicly funded institutions nationally, that is another opportunity to kind of get skills out there into remote and underserved communities as well.
Very much so. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the first 10 minutes, the Discover phase. And the conversation we just had, I'm imagining that's quite a familiar conversation to you guys. We're all quite good at talking about the problem and getting lost in the problem. Now we're gonna stay in the problem stage, but we're going to try and focus our thoughts a bit more by defining what problems there are around rural connectivity to Scotland's tech ecosystem. So I'll leave 5 minutes for this one, and the clock is going. So first thing to do, I guess, is to characterise what we mean by rural, remote, underserved in the context of tech ecosystem, and if there are any examples of that we can use.
Should we start with Maria?
Yeah, I think Maria's probably well placed for this one.
When we think of rural, for me, I think it's anything north of Aberdeen. That's how I would often treat as rural. And we've got the Highlands and Islands, and I don't necessarily want to throw the phrase underserved around a lot, but I feel that if we can use this in a tech ecosystem context, we often find that in our areas, in more rural areas, there's the assumption that we have agriculture, and more traditional rural sectors. And actually, we're proving, even in with our company, that actually there's a large digital sector happening outside there as well. So I would characterize, to answer your question, I would characterize it all as areas that typically aren't assumed to be technology minded.
Excellent. Thanks, Maria.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think there are various classifications of rural and urban, and the Scottish Government have got classifications of that as well. But essentially, when I look at the West Highlands or it's our west coast, large part, essentially from Kintyre to Durness. You're speaking it's remote, rural, essentially. The vast majority of it, anyway. You've got no big cities there. You've got some towns along that kind of west coast. There are not many what we would classify as administrative centres. Inverness is the strange thing is from Kintyre, you're actually closer to the Lake District as a crow flies, although you're part of the Highlands and Islands, than you are to Inverness, which is the centre of the Highlands and Islands. So, I think that it requires some context at times when we put things to the cities such as Inverness that,
I'm going to look at this from a different angle, and it may not be the right one, but it's just a different way of looking at it. So if you take a geographic area of a square kilometre, and you take one in a more rural area and one in the centre of Glasgow, then the number of families that you'd have within that square kilometre will vary considerably. Glasgow, I don't know, thousands, maybe tens in a rural area. And if you have a business and a technology business that maybe employs 10 people, then the proportion of the community, the socio-economic impact of that organisation in that community is massive. And I think we need to look very broadly at impact. Technology is there, hopefully, to have a positive impact. Yes, we know there's some negatives, but a positive impact. And that impact is not just economic, that impact is social as well. So I think when you look at organisations like Maria's organisation in Shetland, has maybe doesn't have hundreds of employees, has a small tens of employees, but supports several families in the socio-economic, and the socio-economic impact of that is proportionately greater than maybe an organisation in Glasgow that might have a couple of hundred employees in terms of the number of families that it's supported.
Excellent. Ross is too sharp. He's already started proposing solutions. Linking with both those points, Ranald and I have discussed in the past of sort of disproportionate support that's skewed by large cities and proximity to those cities, so a rural area that's maybe close to Inverness, the way in which the resources are spread. Is there something you'd like to comment there, Ranald?
I think in terms of allocation of resources, this is an area which is, both within tech and out with tech is an area that requires more focus. There needs to be more transparency and openness around, funding data, essentially. And it is skewed, and I think there's a recognition of that in a lot of places. But it's got to be informed, and at the moment, various kind of Scottish Government policies and strategies, I think 2015 open data kind of strategy, there's not enough being done in the open data space at the moment. There's talk around open data, fair data principles being adopted. It's very aspirational. The teams in the Scottish Government are not, they're not big teams, and it requires a really significant focus to make some of that data more accessible, more reusable, and provide more transparency around that.
Excellent. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our 5 minutes for the second section. So now we're going back into the explorative stage. We're broadening, and we're looking at how we can develop some potential solutions. So I'm going to start the timer and say, what interventions could we start to think about that could spark this systems change that we've been talking about?
I think you can start with what the infrastructure that we have or are developing in the tech sector. We have colleges and universities that have great seats of learning, and in some instances great seats of economic impact around startups and scale-ups, etc. Not all, in fact, there's a lot more we can do in that space. But making their access to that learning, those skills, etc., more generic and remote, I think is absolutely critical. We've got the tech scalers that are arriving imminently. Lots of hard work going on pulling those together at the moment and getting them stood up. And again, they're not just physical places. They are seats of learning, seats of sharing, communities themselves that need to connect out into the rural areas as much as we can. In fact, the default should be remote in that sense as well. So I think there's some stuff around what we currently have that we can leverage. I think that would be a start point.
Maria?
Yeah, I think Ross actually touched on something quite interesting there, that there are already a lot of individual elements. And I feel that there's sometimes assumptions made between the different elements, assumptions about the requirements of a tech ecosystem in a more rural area. And I think actually there need to be more conversations between all the elements to see, where is the overlap, where are the weaknesses, and also testing the assumptions as well.
I think in terms of interventions, maybe kind of touched on it briefly in the last point, one of which was around kind of open data, and I think that, STER, there were some very good things in that. It was well received, understandably so. One of the big omissions, from my perspective, and I know from other people's perspective as well, was around open data. And I think that some of that is a transparency piece. But it's also new products, new services are developed from that as well. And I've seen situations where, in Scotland, where maybe not as open about certain things as we are in England, and there's and I'm not saying there's not a journey in England at all either, but where they're developing products and we are not, and part of it is to do with the accessibility to data and reusability of that as well.
And Maria, I know you're going to have something to talk about with this. Ross and I were speaking earlier about clustering and thematic clustering, and how regional descriptions or regional links don't need to be the only way we link things together. We can look at industry links. We can look at challenges faced by specific communities that are shared across geographic space. And Maria, I know with Silicon Croft, you've adopted this honeycomb strategy. Maybe if you want to look into that a bit.
Sure. So you're absolutely right. We are developing a honeycomb system because we understand that even in an area such as Caithness, for example, as you move between the site throughout Caithness, the requirements of those areas are different. Are they going to be a higher population of schools or a lower population of schools? We've already touched on how resources, how can they be pushed through this tech ecosystem. So what we're doing is we're creating a way that we have a nucleus, and then there's communications in between those as well. So resources flow throughout them, but they are all tailored to the specific requirements of that area.
Excellent. And Ross, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add with the clustering comment as a proposed solution. It's something that's underexplored at the moment.
I think the clusters that we currently have across Scotland are a really positive impact on the tech ecosystem. FinTech Scotland, Travel Tech, etc. They have the ability to connect people. They are a community in their own right, and they pretty much ignore geography. It's geography is one element, but not the defining element of them. So I think when you look at clusters and linking clusters into regional economic development, Scotland has a regional economic development approach. We've got 8 or 9 economic regions, depending on who you talk to, but each of those has a flavour, and I think if we can start aligning more of the clusters with the technology startups and also the education system, etc., even that alignment will bring us opportunities and progress.
Excellent. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the third 5 minutes. So we have 5 more minutes to go, where we'll be bringing things back together, hopefully trying to make some sense of this conversation, and with the deliver phase. So I'm going to start the timer, and start with. So here we're looking to propose some kind of MVP solution, something that doesn't need to change the world. It doesn't need to be some major solution. It's just something that's going to actively contribute to the challenge. So what infrastructure is needed to make the delivery of these interventions successful? And here we can be thinking about also who can provide the support to make that delivery possible.
So I'll kick off. We've talked a little bit about data, and default to open data is a phrase that is been used for years, but I'm going to go default to remote. I mean, there is everything we do, we should default to remote. If we can't do it remotely, then we need to find a way to do it remotely. I'm not saying that everything will be done remotely, and there's a lot of benefit of people gathering, but default to remote is probably just one start point, I think.
And I would actually echo that, and I would like to see Scotland, take be more of a leader in remote working, and it's not just important for people living in rural communities and remote communities as well. You're looking at the people that travel here, and the stage durations of some of these people, visitors, returners, if you like, kind of going and being able to work from home or work from anywhere. There are huge opportunities there in Scotland, and we are a bit behind the curve on that at the moment.
And Maria?
For me, I think an MVP is really focusing on joining those dots. And I apologise if you've said this already and I missed it, but using one of your favourite words, it needs to be scalable. And I absolutely agree, it needs to be remote as well, because as I've already mentioned, just using Shetland as an example with our 22 primary schools, if I can go into them remotely, which is how we've designed Silicon Craft, taking those 66 business days I originally stated to go to all those schools for a block of 6 weeks, I can now do that in half an hour for goodness me, I've got to keep my teeth in. I can now go into school remotely for half an hour a week over that 6 week block, and I can train the educators to use the resources that we have, which helps that to scale up as well.
Excellent. And I'd like to add that we were speaking earlier that let's not let events like these be the climax. So there's lots of excitement up to an event. The event itself is usually, there's lots of energy and lots of people motivated by the opportunity to make change. But then things drop off the edge of a cliff. And we can either try and sort of make the leg after an event, we can sort of slow that drop off, or we can try and pump things up. So what more can we do to really act on these conversations? And the four of us after this, we already have been talking in a group online, and we're hoping that we're going to take this conversation further. So this isn't the climax, and we hope that that approach can be carried through the tech ecosystem as a whole.
Cool. Thanks, Angus.
Okay, well, thank you very much, guys, and we'll be around today if anyone wants to chat.
Thanks, Angus.
I'm around if anyone wants to chat afterwards. So,
thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Maria. Cheers.